Hello, everybody. Welcome to this CERAWeek conversation. The topic for today's conversation is energy transition, how much, how fast. Very important topic, and I'm delighted that I have two great participants joining me for this conversation. First of all, I have Ahmed Koveter, who is the Chief Technology Officer at Saudi Aramco. Ahmed, welcome to CERAWeek conversation.
Thank you. Good to be here, Atul.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. And then I have Shankar Krishnamurthy, who is the EVP in Anji with a portfolio of responsibilities, which include strategy, innovation, industrial development, research, and technology. So Shankar, welcome to CERAWeek conversation.
Thanks, Atul. I've been looking forward to it for a while.
Yeah, we were hoping.
So happy to be here.
Yes, we were hoping to do this in person in March with the two of you. So here we are in July. So let's get started. And just to give our audience a view of what we will talk about. So, energy transition, climate change are hot topics. But here today, we're going to focus from a sectorial point of view. We have two great technology experts, and we will talk about various sectors. We know that electricity has made a lot of progress in terms of decarbonization, transportation less so. And then there is the industrial sector, which is quite difficult to decarbonize. So we will talk about what you see as the future. And then we will also look at how the world is changed in the world of COVID. So let's start with that, first of all. So Ahmed, why don't we start with you and tell us how is it operating and doing research in the midst of COVID? What's changed for you?
So I think the biggest change has been, of course, the inability to see a lot of partners that we're working with around the world at a face-to-face, and that's probably the main thing. We've been able to continue our work, luckily here in Saudi Aramco, to a great extent, as productive as we were before in many ways. Our operations and facilities haven't really been affected. So, our operators and maintenance and such have been working on, as usual, the oil industry, 24-hour, 365-day-a-year operation. So from a technology point of view, we've had some challenges, of course, because we do have a lot of partners around the world. We have work going on in many places, and sometimes you really need to be there to do the work and to kind of, what surprised us is how effective we have been with the tools that we're using today. I mean, the remote teleconference, video conferencing and such really has become our modus operandi now. In fact, I think this is the new normal. This will be the basis for all future, and we will be doing less travel. We'll be working much more remotely and online like we are right now, and we're getting good work done that way. In fact, I think we're more productive in many ways.
Yeah. So Shankar, you are of course running a very big electricity company. So can you just give us a flavor of how things have changed in the last kind of almost 5 months now with this pandemic?
I think the big picture is that, as I was saying, the infrastructure is delivered in terms of its ability to connect people, even while they are not physically in front of each other. That's a big thing. But also at the same time, while all of it works, and I totally agree with you, Ahmed, that going forward, we'll see more of us doing, teleworking. But there are questions about, the social aspect, because employees in the world have been accustomed to working in a certain way. They wish to be able to show up at work to meet their colleagues, and this start to miss a bit. So that's observable. Then on a more practical level, when you talk about, say, research, particularly being able to do that, on the productivity side, the things one can say overall have actually improved, even for researchers, for the reason that people are becoming more disciplined in terms of showing up at meetings. They are more precise when they have to do this teleconferences, etc. At the same time, I think creativity is taking a little bit of beating, because some of the creativity is a function of these interactions that occur, not necessarily scheduled. So you walk around in the office, you are doing something, you run into somebody, you listen to something, that gives you an idea. For me personally, I have great belief in that being a source of good ideas and improving yourself. That part has gone missing. And then on another aspect, the researcher actually don't so much dislike it, because for them, it's a change in the world. which then enthuses them to be able to provide solutions which will have to be researched so they can apply their intellect, their thinking power to coming out with solutions that will help the world be different and be addressing problems for not being able to be always be in front of each other. So I would imagine many positives with obviously a couple of challenges. For us, it's just as it is for a lot of other companies on earth, manageable in most respects, but certain things need interactions. Say, for example, if you got employees to be inducted into a company, I'm sure Saudi Aramco hires them by the thousands. It must be a crazy challenge to say, okay, come here, work for us, but I won't tell you where your office is. So, okay, those are aspects all of us are dealing with.
Ahmed, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah. No, I thought the point about creativity, strikes a chord with me very much. And so that there is a sense of there's a missing element that is so valuable in that interaction, which really is that creativity part, the brainstorming. The brainstorming quality online is just not the same. We do it, by the way. We've had to adjust and do problem solving, brainstorming online. But I have to say, I agree 100%. There's an element of face-to-face creativity, inspiration, whatever you want to call it, that we're missing, and we have to get back to somehow, safely. We'll move back to that normal, I hope.
Yeah. So then linking to that, I was saying with you, how is the pandemic changing? We have a huge economic disruption around the world. Pretty much no country has been spared of that, and despite many good efforts. And then, of course, the climate change challenge hasn't gone away, although the emissions went down, but they have come back again fairly quickly. So how do you think the world needs to balance, and how are you balancing those two priorities, economic development versus climate change?
Yeah, so I think we've heard the consensus almost view across the board globally. If you look at the CEO also letter that the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative CEOs signed jointly, there's a view that, even though there is some challenges from a financial point of view facing all the companies, that there's a resolve, though, to address climate change. Even, I would say, an accelerated resolve in some cases. You heard the public, the New Deal in Europe and other governments announcing actually taking advantage of the financial stimuluses that are needed in the coming years to focus on the transition, using that as a way of accelerating the transition. So to me, if anything, it's created greater pressures on companies to respond and to have strategies that address the climate challenge.
So Shankar, in Europe, as Ahmed just said, the Green Deal, pretty amazing it got passed. So how do you think that's going to impact, and how are you thinking within ENGIE about sort of future of climate change?
So a few things about it. First, yes, the Green Deal, well, actually it was conceived of before COVID hit. The Europeans talk about the 2050 carbon neutral. And the good thing is that it's like 3 days back, they hammered out an agreement on the stimulus package where they agreed to dedicate 30% of that to activities directly related to dealing with climate change. So that's a big number. They got 750 billion as a stimulus, and of that, third goes to climate change related activities. And they want to continue to have the same percentage in their budget until 2000 whatever, so that they meet their goal. This is positive. This is hugely positive. There's no doubt about it. I also take the couple of other things that I would like to say, which is, Atul, you mentioned that the emissions went down, and they quickly started to come back, and you could see so many satellite pictures being initially circulated on what Beijing looked like, and later, etc., etc. But then the way I see it, that is 2020 is a year in which the estimates for emissions are expected to be, say, south of 30 gigatons, which is a number that was seen in 2010. So it's like 10% below 19, but it's a significant 3 gigatons less And because the economies will take a little bit of time to recover over the next few years. So I would imagine that to hit the 2019 levels again, it'll take a couple of years. And that gives a very small breather. Okay? So you say, okay, it has had a massive impact on the economies, people are suffering, etc. But an offshoot of all of that is that it's been, in a sense, positive for the climate. Gives you, 6-7 gigatons to play with. It's not huge, but it is something. That's one element I would like to mention. The other one is, and Ahmed and I were earlier talking about this with you, Atul, which is the changes in the way we are trying to work. It's also teaching us that you can actually live differently than what you have learned to live all your life, okay? Which is what perhaps is needed. Like you need to tell yourself that you don't necessarily have to be doing exactly whatever you did in the past. So that COVID has taught us, which can be very positive for the climate change matters, because one of the challenges every time somebody talks about doing stuff that helps the climate is, no, this is not how we do things, right? So I see that those two as positives on top of the stimulus that Ahmed mentioned and that I support.
So Ahmed, can I go back to your comment sort of in passing about the OGCI CEOs signing up? So could you just expand on it and for our audience, just remind everybody who is OGCI and what's the commitment which was made last week?
So the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative is a grouping of major international oil companies, 13 major companies, both, of course, European majors and the American majors, as well as Saudi Aramco and CNOOC. And the companies have come together since 2015, originally under the umbrella of the World Economic Forum and then independently, basically to address climate together in a number of initiatives. And one of the major initiatives, of course, is an investment program, a venture investment program of $1 billion into carbon capture technologies, methane mitigation, and other technologies that could address the challenge, but also in many major projects that were developed, such as the UK Teesside carbon capture project, and other projects which we're looking at jointly addressing. But also the most important, I think, element of this is it's CEO-led. And it really brings the CEOs together to consider how the industry can really address climate and setting targets actually for the group, which are really reducing the carbon footprint of our operations and our overall emissions ultimately. And the OGCI has been, I think, very progressive in its approach, really set the standards in many ways in how to deal with emissions across the oil industry. So it's really been a great positive force toward addressing the transition. And I think we'll be seeing more great work going on in the next few years from there.
Okay. And Shankar, electricity, I said in my introduction that the electricity sector has where the most of the action has happened on decarbonization. Could you say a little bit about, what you are doing in Anji? What have you done? What sort of in terms of, lower emissions or decarbonization priorities for your portfolio?
So there are a few things that people know us for, and there are others which we do, but which are less known. So I will quickly deal with all of that. The big thing is that, yes, we are a utility. Historically, utilities had their positions in coal, and they continue to have, most of them have positions in gas, etc. What we've been doing in the last few years is to, first of all, stop coal plants, either outright closing them down, as we did in Australia, or not having ourselves anything to do with them, which then brings pressure on the rest of the community, because if guys like us stop doing coal, the value of those assets start to fall, and then there are ultimately no buyers, okay? So we work on those fronts, and that is fairly well known. There are two other things I would like to mention. One is we are a big fan of energy efficiency, okay? So I've heard my former boss talk often about the fact that if you don't consume, then you don't have to produce. Okay? So energy efficiency is a subject which hasn't received the kind of attention, for instance, that solar or wind, etc., have received. For us, it is one of those businesses where we are going and telling industries that we can work with you. We have, say, a certain knowledge set that enables us to discuss with you the specifics of your carbon footprint, for example, and to propose solutions to you, and for us even to provide these solutions if you so desire. Okay? So we work at several levels on making buildings, industries, etc., more energy efficient. And in certain cases, we are able to, for example, propose either energy performance contracts saying that, okay, I guarantee so much. If it doesn't happen, then, well, I'm contractually bound to deliver it. The other side of it is that often you find that all industries everywhere, you buy something today, and then it has a life of 30 years. But then the technology is changing very fast, and in 10 years from now, something much better emerges. Take lighting, for example, the LEDs of today compared to 15 years back or 20 years back. So you find yourself in a situation where an owner has assets that are not fully depreciated. So he says, okay, why would I invest again when I bought it 10 years ago? At the same time, given certain circumstances, someone like us can go and make a proposal saying that I'm the one who's investing into changing energy consuming devices at your end at my risk, and you pay to me from the savings that you would make, and therefore I become an asset owner and I guarantee the performance. And so those that they are driving the business of energy efficiency. And then of course everybody recognizes that we are a fairly large player in the renewables space, not so much only because of the fact that we have, say, 20 some gigawatts of renewables, a lot of others have, but we have a piece which is probably critical to making renewables work in a system. For example, people like a Microsoft or an Amazon or whoever expects green electricity to be delivered to them on the basis of what they consume rather than on the basis of what is produced. So you need somebody, and we've got these an experience, a history of constructing profiles that meet the needs of demand on the basis of us accumulating several sources of energy, some produced by ourselves and some sourced in the market. So it's that piece which makes us some sort of a bigger contributor in a world where people want to go green.
So Ahmed, I want to come to you and talk about transportation actually, because Saudi Aramco is the world's #1 oil producer, and therefore emissions from transportation are clearly in your radar screen. And you have done some very interesting work led by your technology team around new technologies related to the efficiency point which Shankar is making. So could you talk a little bit about emissions in transportation sector? How do you see them going forward?
So as you know, transportation is one of the biggest sectors for emissions, and so it's an important area for us to work on. But I would like to just kind of share our view. Our view is more of a full life cycle toward emissions. So we're very much looking at how we can create the greatest reduction of emissions across the full life cycle. So we don't like to focus only on the actual transport sector itself, but actually providing the energy to the transport sector first. And so it's very important that we actually do a lot of upfront work on the full life cycle studies, such as, for example, for oil, the oil industry. And as you know, the typical or roughly the emissions associated with an oil barrel are about 435, from the average oil barrel globally, is about 430 or so kilograms per barrel. People don't realize that up to 60 kilograms of that barrel are actually on average, and much more for some oils, are actually emitted just in the production, just before you even start using that fuel. So there's a lot of work to be done up front of just providing. There's a huge opportunity. Up to 15% of the emissions associated from the use of oil products can be saved up front where we're producing, just producing the oil by emission efficiency was the great one, of course. But even simple things like flaring, reduction of flaring, which creates value, methane leaks, reduction of methane leaks, and then incorporation of renewables in the production. So there's a lot of opportunity to bring down, because the actual use of the barrel is harder to decarbonize because it's not stationary. The mobile transport, aviation, large marine, heavy duty, those are very difficult to decarbonize. So the first step is really to decarbonize the process of production of the energy up front. And there's a huge opportunity of about 1 gigaton per year till to the year 2000, 2100, almost 60 gigatons in the next century, that could be saved just from the production side. So there's a tremendous opportunity to save because we're going to be here for a long time from use of oil. So our best low-hanging fruit is actually, before we even provide the petrol at the pump, let's get that carbon footprint as low as it will go. So this is where our focus was initially, is how can we avail the lowest carbon footprint fuel for the transport industry, and of course for all uses of oil, but specifically transport is the highest use. So about 57% of oil goes to transport. Of that, about 50 per 50, I'm gonna say, between light duty and heavy duty. So in those two areas, we looked at how can we help to maximize the value generated from that. And that's basically through efficiency. How can we improve the efficiency of what we do deliver to the transport sector? And we've done a lot of work working with OEMs in our own research centers on what we call fuel engine matching, which is basically removing the constraints of the fuel to the engine design, allowing automakers to optimize their engine designs based on optimized fuels and customized fuels. So this has been a really exciting area where we have identified really the biggest opportunity is to move the bulk of combustion from the conventional light duty vehicles from spark ignition to compression ignition. So how can we have the cleanest compression combustion availed for the light duty vehicle sector and improve the heavy duty as well? So we've done a lot of work with OEMs and others on improving the combustion process with technologies that allow clean combustion and lower emissions. And so this is where we think there's the low-hanging fruit, the immediate opportunity which can move the fleet as a whole, the existing fleet, in some cases with drop-in fuels to much higher efficiencies. So this is why big focus area for us. But of course, we go beyond that to other fuels as well, new fuels, synthetic fuels, and hydrogen, which have low carbon fuels, I would call them, and then hydrogen ultimately, which is a zero carbon fuel. So we do a lot of research in all of these areas. And we have collaborations and pilot projects, including, of course, the famous mobile carbon capture, which is a concept we took initially from light duty vehicles. Now we're doing heavy duty, and now we're going on to even ships and looking at capturing the CO2 from the stack and storing on board and then disposing of, which is economically viable for large vehicles, actually.
So thank you for that explanation. Two things you brought up, which we want to talk about both a little bit briefly. One is, of course, hydrogen. And I've been in the industry long enough to remember that we have talked about hydrogen at least a few times, maybe half a dozen times before. So Shankar, why don't we start with you? Why is there so much excitement about hydrogen? What excites you about hydrogen?
Well, it's happening this time. That's what I would say. The way I see that is, there is, in the last few years in particular, a greater appreciation of the need for something like hydrogen. I would say broadly green gases to exist if one has to meet the requirements of lowering emissions at a level where a planet is safe. So for me, the starting point is that we've had a lot of arguments, and there are so many climate skeptics, etc., climate deniers, who sort of created a feeling where it is difficult for everybody to quickly agree with what most scientists have been saying. Okay, but decade after decade, these guys have been narrowing down in their assessment of what the impact would be in terms of, say, increase in temperature of the planet if we continue to emit a certain gigaton of greenhouse gases. As I was reading a couple of hours before our call today, a report which says that the scientists now converge on an impact which is more in the narrower range of 2.6 to 3.9 degrees, as opposed to 1.5 to 4.5 that they have been talking of till now. So the best case scenario vanishes, and what you have is, so I look at it as, okay, there is going to be an impact unless you did something. Everybody agrees. That's the starting point. The second point is that a lot of debate has occurred quite unnecessarily on the ability of electrification in itself to address everything on Earth. Okay, I guess in the last couple of years, the discussion has become more intelligent, and there are more people agreeing that this is not a solution in itself. You can obviously increase the electrification percentages, etc. But then at the end of the day, you do need something which is different, and then the gases come into picture there. Okay? So why we are getting more excited is that a couple of years ago, we started a whole business unit for hydrogen. Okay? People laughed at us and saying that, what's it with these guys? But I guess we got it right, because in the last 2 years, there's been a lot of news flow on a lot of people doing a lot of things around hydrogen. Okay? Now, in a big way, it is starting to happen because people have gone ahead and started to invest in making it possible. We have gotten lucky with the falling price of, say, renewables, which is going to help hydrogen prices come down. And then for scaling up, you got Germany having its own big plan on hydrogen, Europe having a big plan on hydrogen, etc. So I see, firstly, a belief that the planet has a problem, the fact that electrification is not an answer in itself, the fact that last 3 years a lot has been done by a lot of companies, and these big moves in Europe are making me convinced that this time around, this is going to happen. It's a matter of time, because yes, the numbers are not satisfactory as of today from an economic perspective. You still have a big gap to bridge, but most people believe that it's a question of a decade to 2 decades when price parity will be achieved.
So I can, Ahmad, I can understand why a power guy will be interested in hydrogen, but what about an oil person? Why are you excited about hydrogen?
So as an oil company, I mean, as any oil and gas company, we're actually the biggest hydrogen companies in the world. So in many ways, hydrogen is really the key to hydrocarbons. If you look at the energy content of hydrocarbon, and I would say it's more than the energy, it's the fungibility of hydrocarbons as opposed to carbon, where carbon is a difficult to transport, difficult to move. It's the hydrogen which makes the difference in terms of fungibility and transportability and energy density that gives the advantage to hydrocarbons. So we recognize that half of our business right now is hydrogen. And so what we need is the hydrogen without the carbon. And so that's very much, if you look at the lowest cost, in fact, sources of hydrogen, in fact, the lowest cost sources of decarbonized hydrogen, it's actually byproduct hydrogen for petrochemicals. Because the petrochemicals serve as basically a sequestration of the carbon in a material which doesn't burn. It's used not to be burned, hopefully. And the excess hydrogen from the hydrogen balance, the hydrocarbon balance, is really the lowest cost green hydrogen, as we can say. So we have actually we have a great advantage, a resource advantage in our petrochemical industries and our refineries that can avail the lowest cost hydrogen at scale. So there is definitely interest from oil companies to have to look at hydrogen as an energy vector. But I would go back to your question, why is this different? So I see 3 things different. I'm just confirming kind of said, which is basically 1, technology. I think the technology has definitely matured. Fuel cells, we have actually commercial products out there now, as opposed to the 2000s where there were no vehicles, there were no uses for the hydrogen other than conventional combustion and others. So the technology has definitely matured, and that makes a difference. There's now a potential market. 2 is the economics. I think the fact is that the incredible drop we saw in renewables costs and prices is making the economics viable now for an energy vector that's competitive with hydrocarbons. I think it's an interesting, or chemical energy vector which is competitive with hydrocarbons. There was never, prior to the drop in renewable prices, the potential for a chemical energy vector to be competitive with hydrocarbons. And I think the third element is reality. Reality strikes policymakers and regulators when they look at the scale and of the potential transition. Electricity represents maybe 18% of the primary, over the use of primary energy mix. To do electrification of the other 80% is technically, and I would say not just technically, but also from a financial and economic, to basically transition to completely new infrastructures in the chemical industry, ammonia industry, steel industry. That is a challenge beyond just technology. And technology is enough of a challenge. So I think reality strikes when you realize you do need some kind of chemical vector to decarbonize those other sectors. And I think that's where I think that realization of the time needed to electrify all of these other sectors and scale up the renewable industry to meet the demand in all those sectors, I think that's when people start looking at the numbers and understanding we need something like hydrogen or methane or other synthetic uses of renewable electricity, which I think is what's happening. And we're seeing this kind of I would say, a eureka moment, in the industry and among governments, that this is the only option. This is really a converging solution. We're seeing the technology catch up. We're seeing the regulation support and the government support, and we're seeing the costs and economics fit just in time.
So, Shankar, I want to ask you a couple of sort just in the final few minutes we have. Two technologies, which are sort of controversial somewhat, and you said in Europe where I think they are even more controversial. One is, of course, nuclear, and the other is carbon capture and sequestration. So can you say, you're thinking, Angie's thinking on those, and of course, nuclear is a big part of your portfolio, right?
Yeah. So first we have to be aware so for nuclear, we took a decision some years ago to not be participating in investments in more nuclear projects. Okay? We took a decision. Yeah, it's a decision taken by us in function of what is best for our company. Okay? So it's like all the companies on earth, we have limited capital and we have to find the best use for it so that our shareholders are the happiest as well. So in the scheme of things, overall, we said we got our nuclear facilities in Belgium. They're doing well, but we don't want to invest in nuclear. We would rather use the money to grow wind, solar, etc. So that was a decision taken. There's no coming back on that. However, we do have engineering or capabilities to do maintenance or solve problems in nuclear plants, etc. And those services are provided. Okay. On CCS, I have to say that within the utilities industry, the discussion on CCS has been way less frequent and way less intense compared to oil and gas. Okay? I can give you my take. Okay, I wouldn't say this is my company's take because my company operates in a space where the discussions are limited on this subject. So my own take on CCS is I always say that one of the problems that there has been for the growth of CCS is that it has not attracted the kind of it has not been in the limelight like solar and wind, which prevents a lot of discussions taking place in the right places for people to say the kind of stuff. For example, I could say that if you replaced all the vehicles to electric vehicles today and you save some gigatons, that's all squandered away by a few coal plants which are under construction or have been recently commissioned. If you look at the numbers, it's like converting the whole the fleet on Earth and then losing it via emissions that the coal plants do. And there's no stopping them because they are very new and they want to run their life next few decades. There's only one way, which is to capture CO2 and store it away. Of course, it comes with a lot of difficulties because there is not enough in the name of acceptance by the public, largely on account of the fact that not many governments has gone around trying to regulate or have formed or to promulgate laws, etc., that deal with the ownership, the liabilities, etc., associated with transportation and a permanent storage. It's a big subject. In some countries, there is a fair bit of regulation, US, UK, Australia, Canada, Denmark, etc. But those are very few countries and it's not sufficiently evolved. My belief is that, and I have looked at some of the work that IEA does or others do. So for example, IEA would say that 10% of emissions by 2050 should be stored away somewhere. As CCS should contribute 10% to emission reduction. It's a big number. And then you look at today's number of plants that mostly oil and gas has been, it's small. It's like, it's also tertiary stuff. It has other usages, etc., etc. So it's like 18, 20 plants. You probably need way more than that.
So Ahmad, you have been, and Aramco has been at the forefront of this. You had this very large conference when we were still meeting back in February. So what is your prognosis? Shankar has laid out some interesting aspects of, the challenge, right?
I mean, with Shankar's point, exactly. I mean, it has not taken off, and it's been mainly due to the lack of, say, recognition or support from governments and frameworks. And it's the lack of a price, basically, because it is a cost. If you look at carbon capture and sequestration, it's a cost, and commercial entities can't do cost alone without some kind of, some framework for that. If the market will value it, though, it will take off. And I'm quite confident that today we're seeing governments and markets actually beginning to value the life cycle benefits of things like carbon capture. So, for example, we see that, for example, hydrogen is actually a great enabler of carbon capture. Much of the hydrogen that will meet the initial demand in the next 10, 20 years, low carbon hydrogen, is going to have to come from conventional natural gas reforming coupled with carbon capture. And we see a number of major projects trying to address that in Europe today, some proposals. And I think they're going to go through. I think that we just heard the Norway project was approved a few days ago. So this is going to create a market opportunity, because that now you can price the carbon capture in the price of the product, which I think is a big breakthrough. It will be, if markets value the low carbon content of products like blue hydrogen, green hydrogen, then that will translate into the best technologies, the lowest cost technologies that achieve that. So we think the best approach is to have an agnostic approach, and really set governments and consumers should really look for the final carbon, the life cycle carbon content as the criteria to judge a product or to price the product. If that happens, then we will see the best technology win, whether it's carbon capture, renewables with storage, which we are big believers in as well, hydrogen, green hydrogen, and blue hydrogen. We want to see which will win, actually. We're working on different opportunities. So this is where I think the market will drive these if we can price the carbon content in the product ultimately. And the same way, by the way, that could actually even differentiate between different hydrocarbon products. For example, we believe we have a huge advantage. Our oil, for example, is the lowest carbon footprint oil from a production point of view. In our upstream, we have about 10 kilograms. We emit about 10 kilograms for every barrel, 10 kilograms of CO2 for every barrel, which is incredibly low. And if the market priced that, then we would, like we said before, there's an opportunity to huge reduction of emissions just that recognize that difference. And so I'm a big believer in market forces that could actually incentivize, in many ways, these technologies. And I'm confident that with these new emphasis on decarbonization, on extreme decarbonization, hard to decarbonize sectors, that CCS will find its place in the market, because there really is no easy way to decarbonize steel. We've looked at the economics for decarbonization, and in the near future, if you want to achieve those really extreme decarbonization targets, very difficult challenges, without CCS, it's very hard, it's very expensive, because you have an existing, as Shankar mentioned, you have the existing new coal power plants, which is an economic loss, a stranded asset, and then you have steel industries, you have petrochemical industries, which just cannot electrify easily. It's a big challenge to move to electrification. You could bring hydrogen, and as we said, and eventually hydrogen will play a role in these industries, but it's going to be expensive for now. The scale isn't there, as we said. Still the costs are higher than a hydrocarbon. So I believe the solution will be at scale CCS for the next 20 years for a lot of these traditional industries where the infrastructure is already in place.
Yeah. So clearly, just like hydrogen, the conversation on CCS is picking up. That's good news. So so we got really a tour de force of of the world of energy transition and decarbonization. Thank you to both of you for this wonderful conversation around energy transition. And thank you to all of our audience for joining us for this CERAWeek conversation presented to you by IHS Markit. Thanks again.
Thank you, Atul.
Thanks, Atul. Thanks, Shankar.